Hello, my good people. Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCPO DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2016 Audi S3. Today on the Audi behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace the alternator. This is going to be applicable to most MQB cars, your A3s, your S3s, GTs, TTSs. So let's talk a little bit about what we got in front of us. We're using a Valeo 140 amp unit. This alternator is going to be an exact replacement for what's in the car. Typically, a couple ways you can tell if they're going bad is simply by checking it with a voltmeter, depending on what it's producing. A healthy alternator like this one, specifically for the car behind this, should be running anywhere from 13.5 to 15.2 volts at idle. So if it's doing anything less than that or anything over that, then you know you might have a problem. Another telltale is if your battery light is on your dash. That's an easy way to know if there's something up with your electrical system. Could be the battery, could be the alternator. Again, a voltmeter is going to be your best friend in that situation. Today we're using just a stock OE Valeo replacement. It comes with a decoupling pulley already installed. Just a quick fact about the decoupling pulley. It's a spring and clutch mechanism. The very short of it is when the car is under load, the pulley is engaged, allowing everything to spin, allowing the alternator to charge and run the electronics in the car. Depending on the driving during like deceleration or a peak change in belt speed, this is going to disengage, allowing the alternator to essentially save its components a little bit. You're not overrunning it like you would in a traditionally fixed pulley. That's just the gist of it. There's a lot more out there on that. If you want to look into that, be sure to check that out. But before we get started, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, we're going to start with a very long screwdriver. This is simply here to help when you're reaching down in some hard to reach spots. Otherwise, you can use something else. We have a regular flathead and a small pick tool. Again, all just helping us with some of the electrical connectors that we're going to be encountering. We're going to be using a stubby 13mm wrench. We're also going to have a couple extensions ranging from 3" to 1.5" for the 3/8 and quarter drive sockets that we're going to be using today. We have a T30 and a T25. We're going to have a 7mm socket, which is going to be helpful for the clamps on the charge pipes. You can also use a flathead screwdriver for that as well. We have a 16mm socket, which is going to be nice for our belt tensioner. You can sub that in for a long 16mm wrench. We also have two different size 13mm sockets, as well as a 10mm socket. And for the tools that are going to be running those sockets, we have a 1/4" and a 3/8 drive ratchet, a 3/8 drive torque wrench, and then a couple nice to haves, but not necessary, of course, are always a flashlight, an electric ratchet just to speed up the removal and install of our hardware. I'll be using this Astro 94093 tool for the clamp on my intake boot. However, you can sub that out again for a pair of pliers. Now that we have our tools covered, let's get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, since we are working with the electrical system on the car today, the very most important and first thing we must do before we touch anything is disconnect our battery. So let's get started with that. You're going to lift up its comforter, duvet cover, whatever you want to call it, and start by disconnecting the negative terminal first, followed by the positive. To do that, you're going to need a 10mm wrench or socket. I'm using a 10mm socket on an extension. Once that's loose, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect my negative terminal. Set that off to the side. Now I can go ahead and disconnect my positive terminal. With those off, we can go ahead and use our duvet cover just to cover up the terminals again. That way we don't risk accidentally causing a connection again. Next, while we're over here, we're going to work on removing our air box. We have a couple things to look for. We have a vacuum line that feeds in right here. We're just going to pull that off. And set that somewhere over here so we remember later. Secondly, we have our clamp that holds the box to the intake tube. You can use a set of pliers. I'm using this Astro tool to do the clamp, and it holds it in place, which is great. And now we're going to go ahead and separate it from the tube. Just pull back like that. I'm going to set this clamp and tool off to the side so it's not in my way. And now comes the part to pull the air box out. It's got two rubber grommets that hold it into place. You're simply going to pull up on it to get them off. There's one. There's two. Then you have your connection to the front fan shroud up here. Just be mindful as you pull that up. But you can just sneak it like that. Set this off to the side. With our airbox removed, the next step is going to be to get this top fan shroud cover off. So to do so, free up this coolant line. It's got 2 clips that hold it in place. Just pull them up. You can see it's notched, so it's easy to know how it goes back on later. Set that off to the side. You're going to have 2 T25 screws on the radiator support, 1 on either side that you're going to have to free up. So get those off. I'm just going to use a small flathead screwdriver. There's a little tab, 1 on each end, that you're going to push down on to free this up while pushing forward. There's 1. There's 2. Go ahead and pull that off. And what I'm going to do to save myself some headache is I'm going to thread my 2 T25s back into the plastic so I don't lose them. Next, our job is going to be to free up this coolant line from the fans. So you're going to need a T30 to get both of these screws off. With that done, this coolant hose is free to move. So that is going to help us get this fan out of the way. Next, let's work on removing the electrical connector. Next, we have our electrical connector that we have to disconnect so that it comes up freely with the fans. You have a red tab here that you want to pull up on. Usually this connector is clipped into a plastic piece right there. You can see someone's been in here before. It's broken off, so once you pull it out, you can lift it forward. Do that. And then you should be able to separate these 2. There we go. Beautiful. Now we have 2 clips on either side of the fan shroud that hold it in place to the radiator. You can see 1 right here. You have 1 more down below. The idea is to get this top plastic tab behind the fan shroud tab so that it can slide up. You can do that by pushing into it with a screwdriver or something similar, while also pulling up on the shroud at the same time. Once you get it started, you're going to want to do the same thing to the other side. All right, with all that out of our way, now our job is to go ahead and get this fan shroud out. First, we're going to start by trying to free it up from the passenger side. Now with that done, our next step is going to be to get the belt off of our alternator / AC compressor so we can remove it. To do that, we're going to go ahead and take off this expansion tank for our windshield washer reservoir. This is a 2-part tank, so you're going to go ahead and remove a 10mm bolt that holds it in place, while another grommet below, securing it to the second half of the tank, also holds it in place. One thing to note though, if your tank is full, you're going to either want to siphon out the fluid or be prepared to catch it underneath with a pan, as it is going to spill out as soon as we separate the 2 tanks. Earlier today, we went ahead and used a syringe and simply pulled out as much of the fluid as we could. I have a couple of pig mats underneath to catch any residual. So let's get started. Again, 1 10mm bolt holding this tank into place. With that out, we can go ahead and start wiggling this tank out of place. Again, all that's holding it below is the rubber grommet that secures it into the secondary tank. This is a grommet. This is the neck that the grommet goes into. We're going to go ahead and set this to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and put my 10mm bolt back in its home so I don't lose it for later. All right, my good people, next on the agenda is going to be freeing up our belt as mentioned prior. To get the belt off, you're going to need a 16mm socket on a ratchet, or you can use a long wrench. Today we're using the ratchet and socket combo. I have my ratchet on the on position. Once I get it on there, I'm going to go ahead and get it so that I'm pulling towards me. You'll see the belt loosen up. And from there, you can simply slip it over the pulley. I'm going to go ahead and leave this tool here so that when I install my belt again, it's ready to go. It's also tensioned in place against the engine mount, so that's also why it's staying there. Now we have 2 things left to do. We're going to go underneath the vehicle partially, and we're going to free up some of the AC compressor bolts on the bottom as well as up top. That's going to allow these lines to move freely so that when we go to pull the alternator out of the way, we can manipulate them a little bit so we can pull it out. So I'm going to lift the car up. If you're working at home on the garage, just make sure you're using jack stands and a floor jack. All right, my good people, we're underneath the vehicle. One thing I want to mention before we get started underneath here is typically you're going to have a splash shield held on by a bunch of hardware. This car has been missing it since we got it in the shop here, so you're going to see everything's open. Just don't be alarmed if you get underneath and you just see a black piece of plastic. You have a bit of hardware to get off before you can get to this point. Once you do, our next move is going to be to locate our AC compressor, which is right up here. And we're going to do a couple things just to help us be able to move it easier. First, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our switch right up here. Usually you can take a flathead and press on the tab and push in and out. You can get these off. That'll allow us a little bit more play when we go to remove the compressor from the block. Next, we have a couple 13mm bolts to remove so that we can free it up. Then you have one more at the back of the compressor. Again, these are all 13mm bolts. And we have one more up top. It's going to be located right here. And then you can simply pull the compressor off. It's going to rest on this pipe a little bit. The lines are going to hold it up top. You're not really going to damage anything as long as you are mindful of the fact that you are putting some stress on the AC lines. While we're still underneath the vehicle, we're going to go ahead and loosen the two 13mm nuts on the bottom of the alternator. Once we do that, we'll head back up top, work on disconnecting our wire from the back of it, and then working on getting it out. So again, two 13mm bolts underneath the alternator. All right. Next on the list, before we undo the top two 13mm bolts, we have our ground in the back of the alternator and an electrical connector that we need to remove. So to get started, let's use a pry tool just to pry this black protective cap off. A pick would work just fine in this situation as well. Next, we're going to work on removing this 13mm nut behind our ground. So let me go ahead and grab a tool for that. I'm using a 13mm stubby ratcheting wrench to break free the nut. With that done, we can go ahead and just simply pull the cable off. And now all we have left is one electrical connector up top. I'm going to try to remove it while it's still in place so I don't have to fight the alternator. If I can't, we'll work on it once we get it out of the block. Now we have to work on getting our alternator out. So there's a couple more things that we're going to have to clear out to get it out from above here, starting with two T30s that hold in this pipe up top. We're going to simply undo them so we have some room to move this about a little bit. Next, what I'm going to go ahead and do is disconnect this oil pressure switch connector. Just like that, just to give us a little bit more room. And then from here, it's just going to be a matter of removing these two lines out of the way and then just working on snaking out the alternator. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're actually going to go ahead and remove this charge pipe. After looking at how everything's set up, it's going to make life easier if you're undoing those electrical connectors, as well as it might give us a better route to pull this alternator out. So I'm just using a 7mm socket on a ratchet to get these off. You can also use a small flathead screwdriver. You have one up top, and you also have one down below as well. What I'm doing is I'm twisting the pipe just to help loosen it off from where it's been sitting for the last couple of years. And then just working it off, like a bit of twisting action. It's gonna look like something like that. All right, we're gonna continue with the charge pipe festival, and we're gonna remove two more T30s that hold this pipe in place. That's gonna allow us to pull it down some more when we get this alternator out of here. There's one. We have one more here by the AC compressor. We also have this radiator hose that's clipped onto your charge pipe. You just want to use a flathead screwdriver to pry that off, just to give you some more flexibility. Now we're going ahead and removing the last two 13mm bolts up top so we can work on swinging this alternator out. So as you can see, we pulled it out from underneath the vehicle. What we ended up doing is lowering this charge pipe a little bit more. This was wedged in between the block and one of the coolant hoses. So it was acting as a stopper. So dropped it down a bit more, pushed the hose out of the way, and then we were able to pull the alternator out. We're gonna do the same thing for the install. We're gonna push this to the side, set it up in place, and then use the same hose to hold the alternator, get back up above, and start connecting everything back together. Now our install, same thing. We're gonna use this radiator hose a bit. For now, we're gonna push it over to the side, feed our new alternator up, and now we're gonna rest it on the hose like that, very gently. You can put a piece of cardboard in between the alternator and the radiator if you don't want to damage the fins. With that there, I'm gonna get back above in the engine bay, bring up the alternator, plug in some electrical connectors, and then work on mounting it to the block. So I'll catch you up there. All right, back up top, I'm gonna go ahead and feed the alternator up to me. And as I have it resting somewhat up here on top of the tensioner assembly, I'm gonna take this opportunity to plug back in my electrical connector. I'm gonna go ahead and plug in my connector while I have it here. Beautiful. And I'm gonna get the nut started on my ground. We're just gonna start it by hand. We're gonna leave it loose. We'll tighten it up once the alternator is bolted fully to the block. Beautiful. With that, we can guide this back up. And then I'm going to resituate myself real quick, and we'll work on starting the top two 13mm bolts. Once you have it started a decent way, you can then use that to support it for a moment while you start the others. Just going to snug them up a little bit more with my stubby 13 ratcheting wrench. Before we tighten these anymore, we're going to go ahead and reach underneath and start the other two 13mm bolts. Once all four of them have been started evenly, then we can go ahead and torque them all down. Now we're going to go ahead and start the bottom two 13mm bolts while everything's still nice and loose. This is something you can do from up top. We're just shooting it from down below so we can give you the best view of what it's going to look like, especially if you're working from up above. With all four in place, we're going to go ahead and snug them up with the electric ratchet, and then we're going to torque them down. For the steel bolts, the torque spec is 23 Newton meters. If your car is equipped with aluminum bolts, you're going to want to replace them. They're going to be torqued to 8 Newton meters plus 180 degrees. Again, steel bolts, 23 Newton meters, which is what this car has, both for the alternator and the AC compressor. Aluminum bolts, 8 Newton meters plus 180 degrees. So just keep that in mind. There is two kinds. Just using a 3/8 drive torque wrench set to 23 Newton meters. Now let's head back up top and button up the top two bolts, and then we'll work on putting in our AC compressor and charge pipe and all that good stuff. All right, back up top, we're just gonna snug up these two 13s with the electric ratchet. Same thing again, we're gonna torque them down to 23 Newton meters. While I have you here, we're gonna work on tightening down this 13mm nut on the back of our alternator for our ground wire. Again, I'm just using my stubby ratcheting wrench. With that snug up, I'm gonna go ahead and put that protective cap back on. Just goes over like so. Bam, baby. Beautiful. While I have you up here, we're gonna put in the two T30s that we had taken out originally up top here, just so we don't forget them later. Just nice and snug, doesn't take a lot of torque. If you did follow along earlier too, don't forget to plug in your oil pressure switch again. Now we're gonna go ahead and work on reinstalling our charge pipe. I'm gonna start by feeding it up to the throttle body. You can see on the hose itself, the clamps are awesome. They're kind of stapled, if you will, to the rubber boot. So I'm gonna feed this exactly back up how I had it earlier. That way my curvature and everything is aligned properly. And then I'm gonna head underneath and attach the plastic pipe that we undid. So if you remember, the clamp faced something like that. We're gonna leave that loose for now. Let's lift the car back up and we'll reattach the rest of our plastic charge pipe and line everything up. Now back underneath the vehicle, one thing I want to point out that we didn't show you earlier was when Aaron was helping me, we went ahead and disconnected our mass airflow sensor. So just be mindful of that. You want to make sure you undo that before you pull down on the pipe further than we did. So I'm just going to go ahead and plug that in so we don't forget it. With that done, we can go ahead and move this radiator hose a little bit so we can feed our plastic charge pipe into the bottom of the rubber boot that we took off earlier. With our charge pipe lined up, we can work on feeding these two T30s back into place. We have one over here, started by hand, and we have one underneath the AC compressor. Then you have one more up above the charge pipe below the AC compressor. With our charge pipe back in place, don't forget to clip your radiator hose to the tab up here. Beautiful. All right, now we can go ahead and reinstall the hardware for our AC compressor. Again, we have 3 bolts for that. Same ones as the alternator. Don't worry about mixing them up. That's going to hold most of it in place. Now we're going to continue to the one at the back of the alternator by our switch. That one went in nice and smooth. And then we have our last one right up top. Beautiful. And just as the alternator went, we're going to go ahead and tighten them up gently with the electric ratcheting wrench, and then we're going to torque them up. Sweet. Now we can torque these all down to 23 Newton meters. With those done, we have our electrical connector to plug back in. There's that. And then while we're down here too, we're going to go ahead and just gently feed our belt back over our AC compressor. All right, next on our laundry list is going to be the clamps for the charge pipe. Again, can't forget those. So starting with the top one, since it's easy access, again, a flathead screwdriver will work, or a 7mm socket. The one thing to remember if you're using a ratchet setup like I am is you can easily over torque these and strip the clamp. So just be mindful as it gets tight that you're going to put a lot more power through this than you would with a flathead screwdriver. The feel's a little bit different. So that's nice and snug for the top one. Now we're going to reach down there and do the bottom one. All right, baby. Next on the list, let's get our belt back in place. As you remember earlier, our tool's still there. I'm going to use a really long flathead screwdriver just to get the belt back over the crank. If possible, I might have to reach under there with my hands. We have our belt lined up on our crank, belts lined up on our AC compressor. And pull on the tool, slip it over. Using a flathead screwdriver to push it underneath. Boom, baby. All right, my good people, just to recap, our alternator is in, our belt is back on, everything's torqued down, plugged in. Next on our list is reinstalling our fan shroud with our electric fans. So just like we pulled it out, pulling it out from the driver's side first, we're going to go ahead and install now the passenger side end first so that it can clock in underneath our connection for that radiator hose down there. So without too much more talking, let's just get into it. Something like that. And then as you guide in the top clips, you want to make sure your bottom ones also go in. You see we got the bottom one lined up and the top one lined up. You want to make sure you're doing that on both sides. Bam, baby. Now we can go ahead and resecure this coolant pipe back to the fan shroud. Again, that was held on by 2 T30s. You have one right in here in front of the throttle body. That started by hand. You have one in between the AC hoses over here. Just for reminders, this is a T30, and you're not really going to tighten it too much. You're just snugging it up as it does thread into plastic. With that done, our next thing is going to be to plug in our electrical connector. You'll hear a clip, lock down that red tab, and then tuck it back where you found it. Something like that. With our coolant pipe secured, we can go ahead and install this upper shroud cover. I already removed my 2 T25s that I saved earlier, making sure that your plastic clips on the end clip back into the radiator support, and then start our T25s back in. Now we can go ahead and reinstall this coolant line back up top, and our air box. Again, we're going to feed it in at an angle so that it clips into this upper shroud piece through the 3 grommets that hold it in place. We have our hose clamp situated back over our intake tube. Feed that intake tube back onto our air box. And releasing it back into its home. Beautiful. With that situated, we can reinstall our reservoir tank for our washer fluid. Now I'm going to go ahead and take out my 10mm bolt that I left on the motor mount earlier, so I didn't lose it. I'm going to go ahead and feed my reservoir tank back into place. Beautiful. That's what you want to hear. Feed your 10mm back in. And with that, all we have left is to button up our battery and wrap up this job. Now we can take the sleeping cover off of our battery. And starting with the positive, we're going to connect that one first. Make sure it's seated properly. Then taking a 10mm socket, we're going to snug up this clamp. Again, these don't take a lot of force to tighten them down. You can kind of feel it quickly. Double check it. It's not going anywhere. Now we can do the same thing to our negative. And boom, baby. There you have it. All right, and there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a pretty easy to do job, just a bit tight as everything is crammed into this tight package, but overall very doable. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. Let me know if you run into any issues with your alternator on your MQB chassis. I'm just curious. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.